you again to start that conversation.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I guess this one doesn't come with such a strong proposal as much as opening up the door for conversation and looking to get questions answered. But I guess seeing now with these lockdowns or increased measures on particular small businesses, I'd reached out to some small businesses because you see people kind of vetting and that narrative getting built up of frustration. And what I heard back was that the business owners weren't as concerned about their business per se. They were concerned about the employees that they were having to lay off, the uncertainness of that, understanding the finances of those employees and assuming that they're taking on debt to do this and to no fault of their own. So in that, I proposed some type of arm's length contribution that the city could maybe perhaps make and help support the administration of, again, arm's length, to provide some type of financial assistance on top of what's being offered or fill in those gaps in response to the folks that are been laid off because of the small business closures. Again, I have more questions on this than answers, but I think there's good logic to suggest that it's an economic stimulus situation. It shows some love to our small business community and provide a little bit of just stability to some of our family units, which, in my opinion, our family units are one of our biggest economic drivers. Outside of the social element, I think there's an economic lens that can be applied to it. But yeah, again, what I'd be suggesting in a very rough way is the city putting up a contribution to establish an arm's length fund that families could apply for to get relief if they're locked out of their employment. And again, I understand this is federal, provincial, but we're very aware that there's gaps here, and we had COVID money come to us, and I'm wondering if it could be utilized.
Thanks, Councillor. I guess just to follow up with you, you mentioned you would have some questions. I'm not sure if you have questions that you'd like to, I guess, address to any of our staff at this time, or maybe just leave it there in the terms of starting a conversation. But
yeah, I would like to initiate that conversation, certainly amongst council. But I think from an economic development perspective, and I'm wondering if there's staff in that department or that have an understanding of the packages that are out there, of the relief packages. We're very familiar with CERB, but I know there was a $300 isolation fund, but obviously that doesn't go far. But I can bet my bottom dollar that there's people taking on considerable debt to meet the needs that were once being met by their own labor.
Thanks, Councillor. So I guess Councillor Arsenault, I see your hand is up as well.
Sure, and I guess I have some challenges, and I understand that there's going to be a lot of questions, I guess, around how this even could work. But I know that the province recently announced a little bit of relief for small business, but the qualifying factors still leave out a significant number of smaller businesses. And I'm going to just some very specific examples. If you look at, the hairstylists who rent chairs, they don't necessarily need to have an HST number, therefore they don't qualify for that, assistance, but their business is closed. Some of them don't make the threshold either of the $30,000 a year, which, creates a whole parcel of other challenges. So, and then there's a whole raft of other businesses as well. We our gyms are closed and et cetera. But I guess I'm interested in seeing what there could be for options here, because having owned a small business myself years ago, I wouldn't have survived the first lockdown. I didn't survive regular times, so I wouldn't have survived the first lockdown. And, here we are 2 years later, and we continue, and we don't know when this is going to come to an end. So I think although it's out of our purview as far as what we're responsible for as a municipal government, I think there needs to be some pretty serious conversation or digging around what this possibility could be for some one-time aid to our citizens.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just sort of following up on Councillor DePlacy and Councillor Arsenault. Well, I think this whole table would something that we could consider looking at. It's certainly, to Chad's point, there would still be a lot of questions in my mind, and I guess the only fear factor for me would become trying to identify, if we are able to, financially, who qualifies, and then of course who doesn't. And I guess that's probably, the fine line that makes this a tricky one for me, because I think in our hearts you would want to make sure that we're reaching out to those who need our help at this, difficult time the most. But who am I to determine whether business A needs it more than business B, and all of the criteria, some of the things Vero just touched on. I think that's what makes this a tricky one. We'd love to be able to help out every small business in the city that's suffering right now. I just don't know if that's feasible or not. But it's something I would certainly entertain the conversation and see if there's something we could do. It might not be earth-shattering in terms of the dollar amount, but I think if this council could show that we have their back or have their support in some way, I could get behind that if the numbers work out, I guess, is my thought.
Thanks, Councillor Summers. I guess just to speak from the chair, and certainly put your hands up, folks, if you want to add into. I think it's an important conversation, Councillor. I thank you for raising it. Admittedly, in some ways, like some of the different COVID rules, I've lost track of what is available out there right now for people and what is not. And I wonder, I think to your point, if our economic development staff are aware of what is out there, and maybe could put or maybe reach out to provincial, maybe to our MLA, and get a sense of. I'd like to have a scan of what help is out there for people, and make sure that citizens in the community know about that. So if they are eligible for something, that we can ensure that they are being able to access that. And I think through doing that, you might also identify where some of those gaps are. And admittedly, for myself, I would struggle with using municipal funds in this way, because I do view that it is up to the provincial and federal government to fill these gaps. But if we identified what the gaps were, then we could consider it if there are members of council who'd like to do that as a council, but also ensure that we're calling on those other levels to fill those gaps too. And so there could be something there. So I guess I would certainly be supportive of some information gathering and identifying what's out there, so people in the community know, and where those gaps are as a starting point. Myself, Councillor Ross Robinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. You made some very good points there. I don't even know what to say. I understand and I appreciate that it's been brought forward. I wonder if it's right or fair for us to give money out, but there has to be a way that we could campaign the other levels of government to either loosen their purse strings a little bit to help out, or to do an ad campaign or a promotional campaign of some sort to encourage more business and that sort of thing. So I'm not opposed to the discussion. As always, I'm fiscally concerned. I don't know how much money we're talking here. And, there are many rocks to turn over and many things to consider before we delve into an area that is generally federal or provincial jurisdiction. But, I understand the concerns, and I understand we're all desperate. It's 3 years, 2 years is long enough. It's time for a change, but I would be interested in the discussion.
I think if I can add to that, Your Worship.
Yes.
Just to, yeah, if I may. Yeah, I think at the very minimum, we need to be educated on where the gaps are in our community. We need to be able to work with the employers who are forced to lay off staff members. I would hope that our economic development department is reaching out to those employers and offering any type of kind of assistance within their own existing realm. And if there is solutions that are kind of met from a staff level in that process, they should be brought to this table at the very least. But I think, yeah, from a strictly not a social, not an income support, not food security, from an economic development, we have a lot of people that just lost their job in our service industries, and from an economic development lens, we need to look at that very closely and see if the damage, how deep the damage is, and what repairs are needed, and if there's advocacy. I think that's probably exactly where we land. But we should be investing in that advocacy as well, not just a few Facebook posts and we do it with the multiplex. I mean, much bigger scale. But we led. We put our money up, expecting the province and the feds to come to the table to help us solve that need. So I think that same level of approach could be pertinent here. Not breaking the bank, but putting up some type of investment, I guess, into that to patching some of those holes.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Johnson, you've got your hand up as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, a noble suggestion Councillor Duplessis makes, and I too concur that people have suffered through the pandemic. It's been tough on small business, but COVID support fiscally is not the job of the municipal government. It simply is not. That is a job of the federal government and provincial government. There's programs out there. So I'm not in favor of this. I'm open to a conversation, but initially I'm not supportive. What I am supportive of, though, is just as Your Worship has stated and Councillor Duplessis has reiterated, raising awareness of the programs that are currently available with the federal government and the provincial government that are the domain of COVID support through the pandemic for small business. And I would go so far as to say that, support for small business through COVID, through individual councillors on social media does help. I've had videos on social media for small business that have over 80,000 views. And I've had messages from small businesses that it's helped them out. But to give municipal tax dollars out through COVID support systems when the federal government, provincial government programs already exist, I think we're putting ourselves in a precarious position, and it's best left to the higher level governments at the provincial and federal level. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Harris,
Thank you, Your Worship. I agree, folks. It's it is federal and provincial that have to deal with this, and we have to make sure that our citizens know what's out there for programs and what is available. If it's a small business grant, or your $300 if you're laid off, or I think it's $500 if your kids cannot go to school and you have to stay home and homeschool them. I mean, there is different programs. You know what? We can be active or proactive, and or reactive, I guess. So. We know we're going to come out of this level 3 hopefully this weekend. I know by all signs, by all talks, schools going back on Monday. Businesses should be back. I don't think restaurants will be back at 100%, but you know what? They may get back to 50%. But I think our job is to make sure our economic department, we're out there, we're advertising, make sure we're buying local, make sure we're going to our local restaurants when Monday opens up, and make sure we're sitting there, make sure, how do you tip a waitress or a waiter, and just different things like that. Try to be, keep our money in the city for the next few months, and it's tough because these stories are all over CBC. There was a restaurant owner in Brighton. He laid off 100 people the Friday that it was announced for the province, and he didn't lay them off for 2 weeks. If you read the article, he laid them off for 6 weeks because he knows we're going back to 50%. Well, there's 100 people that are sitting at home waiting for paychecks from the federal government. It's tough. You know what? I envy all these people, and I hope they all come back and go into the service industry again, because that's where we need them as citizens and as a community. But Jeff and Paul, I hope they have something in place. Monday morning, the City of Miramichi is the first one out saying, hey, restaurants are open, let's get out and support these, run their specials. If it's whatever restaurant, I'm not going to name any because there's so many, but what restaurants or what bars or whatever, run their specials. And you know what, we could spend our COVID relief money a little bit that way in papers or magazines, or social media is free unless we're buying ads on Facebook. So I think we can do more that way than handing out and trying to ask people for their T4s and their paycheck. I just don't think we don't have people. We don't have enough staff maybe to put an outdoor rink in. We'll never have enough staff to go through this stuff. So we'll have to look at it. But I'd be more on the line as Councillor Roth-Robinson and Councillor Johnson. Let's leave it to the feds and province to do it, and let us do our share within our city.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. I wonder. I think Director McTavish is on the call. I guess my thought or suggestion would be: would it be realistic to ask Director McTavish to put together a scan or a list of support programs that are out there for individual citizens and small businesses, and present that to us and therefore the citizens at next week's Committee of Council meeting, and which we could then also use to identify gaps and continue a conversation about what other avenues could be explored, and recognizing that there are divergent views on council, and for good reasons, about what level we should get involved at. But again, starting from a place of gathering information and using that information to continue the discussion in a more informed way. And I guess that was kind of a question to Director McTavish, but I do see that Councillor Duplessis and Councillor Summers have their hands back up. So, Director McTavish, maybe I'll ask you to answer my question. Could you put together a quick scan or summary of the programs federally and provincially for individuals and small business and present that to Council in a week?
Mayor Lorton, I will do my best to get that information gathered and have it sent out prior to your meeting next Tuesday.
Thank you. And then I'll go back now to the councillors who've put their hands back up. So, Councillor Duplessis, I did see you first.
I guess I'd just like to get a recap on, with that COVID funds, where has that been processed? I know we threw around ideas at one point. How much money have we spent of that? Is that just going to go into our general revenue, be budgeted out through our budgeting process? What's the latest on that COVID relief funds, and have we spent it? Are we spending it, or is it just going into general coffers?
Yeah, I guess to the manager or to Madam Treasurer, if you'd like to address that one.
Yeah, so the total that we received was $952,000 approximately. It was rolled into reserve at year end as part of the transfers that we had approved at the December regular meeting. So there's a maximum ceiling on the operational reserve of 5% of the budget. So some of that went into the operational reserve, but the remainder of it rolled into the general capital reserve. And so general capital reserve funds can only be used for capital projects. So there's some that's available out of the general operating reserve, but the majority of it's in the general capital reserve.
Thank you.
Councillor Summers.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Duplessis actually kind of beat me to it there. That was essentially my question. Because I know, I get where everyone's coming from saying this is a federal and a provincial issue. They're absolutely right. But I think it's kind of parallel to what we talked about a while ago there with our discussion about the outdoor skating. I feel like this is our rainy day, so to speak. And I'm happy to hear, I know where the treasurer is coming from, but that amount of money that we received for COVID funds is no small amount of cash. And again, I do not have the answers for how this could all play out logistically. It's definitely a longer conversation than this, but I feel like there has to be at least a chance that we could help some small businesses in our community with that COVID money. I mean, if they ever needed a hand from the city, this is the time for it. And again, I don't disagree with the pushing for advocacy, get as much money from Fredericton, Ottawa, et cetera, as we can to help them. But if those other levels of government are failing us, so to speak, and not helping us out enough, I think we owe it to our residents to try and step up to the plate on this one as best we can, somehow. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Summers. To Deputy Mayor Quinn.
Thank you, Your Worship. As I said, listen, everyone, I do believe that we should advocate higher levels of government to support here, and your directive to Director McTavish to acquire all the programs that are available is positive. But I'm spitballing here in real time. I apologize for this. Maybe this is way off the wall, but maybe we could encourage the downtown's networks and business associations, the DIAs, to do another round of downtown dollars. I know that's a big boom at the Christmas season, and our contribution maybe to subvent, if that should be the appropriate term. I think it's 80 cents on the dollar, so they give up 20, and maybe we can participate that way through the business associations, and maybe Director McTavish can start that dialogue. And I believe I'll throw my hat in the ring, and that of Councillor Places as well, where our external appointments are with Chatham and Newcastle BIA. So just throwing that out there on the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, but thank you, Deputy Mayor Quinn. And building on that too, I think if it's an important conversation and to have, and maybe everybody could, including Director McTavish, think about ways, maybe sort of slightly I hate to use the expression out of the box, but are there ideas or programs or ways that we could help both the individuals that are going without paychecks and some of the most vulnerable small businesses that are not as, cut and dry as a direct subsidy program? I don't know. And maybe we could, engage and have the department engage in some of these conversations with folks and get a sense of, are there any ideas out there? And I do think, we did at the beginning, and rightfully, I think we contributed, but asked Director McTavish to clarify, about $30,000 to shop local campaigns. My concern about that is that most of that money kind of went to advertising on the radio, and it didn't really get to the people that probably needed it the most. So I would, I guess I'd lean on staff, to your point, Deputy Mayor Quinn, to think about potential to talk to the business community and get a sense of what could be done. So a long-winded way of saying, sorry, Councillor Arsenault, to you.
Thanks, and I just want Director McTavish and Mr. McGraw and whoever else is going to kind of pull this together, just to keep in mind that it's not necessarily our downtown businesses, and I think I love the suggestion from Deputy Mayor Quinn. They are absolutely part of that equation, but we also have to keep in mind there are the smaller home-based businesses, and I go back to what I said earlier about hairstylists, and they're just one example, but you don't think of those as bricks and mortar in a lot of cases because they're out of home, but in a lot of cases they are the only support of their family, and they're going without opportunity for funding at this point because they don't qualify. So it's just to keep that in mind, as well as our more traditional brick and mortar businesses that we think of, that we see downtown and things like that, just to kind of plant that seed.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. And I mean, just to reaffirm Councillor Duplessis' point from the beginning as well, was it not necessarily about the businesses themselves, but the employees who are laid off and not having an income through no fault of their own. I see. Okay, Deputy Mayor Quinn, and then back Councillor Johnston, to you as well. But first, Deputy Mayor Quinn.
I apologize, Your Worship. I did not lower my hand from last time. My bad.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Your Worship. Listen, I do have to speak to this because I have had concerned citizens call me that supported me to be here to represent them in terms of being prudent and fiscally responsible with the city. I mean, we have a small population in this city. It's tough economic times. We have an aging population in this city. Our tax base is limited. We just because the door to the bank is open doesn't mean you have to rob it. We have to be fiscally prudent moving forward as a council, in my opinion. And although I do want to see people supported, I do want to see small business supported, I would like to see outdoor recreation and all kinds of things, but I want it well planned, thought out, and done right. Now, listen, people can acknowledge that the federal government, the provincial government, are responsible for COVID interventions, and that's great. But then to turn around and put fiscal pressure on a small municipality like Miramichi in terms of COVID payments, I just don't see it being fiscally viable, and I'm concerned about it. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Councillor. And I just to sort of circle back or try to maybe wrap this up. So Director McTavish, I've asked for him to put together a scan of the programs that are out there, which would be given back to Council for our next meeting, and which, of course, could also be circulated, I would ask Director McTavish, on your social media for the department, which we can then share as well. So we'll get out to our citizens in the next week the information so that they know what's available to them. And I would ask that item be on our agenda next week so that based on having that information, we can continue, if councillors would like to pursue exploring additional options, they could maybe bring forward their suggestions at that time. Does that make sense? And I guess to maybe again to the manager, good conversations tonight, but it just from making sure I'm doing things the right way. In order to get that on the agenda next week again, Mr. Manager, do I require a motion?
No motions required, Mr. Mayor. It'll be on the meeting next week.
Thank you. And Councillor Duplessis, I see your hand up one more, so back to you.
Just really quickly, I just want to reiterate my opinion that starting with those employers who have had to lay off folks in this latest level 3 is who I think we need to start with. So I think knocking on their door, picking up the phone and calling them is probably a good place to start for a staff's perspective.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. I mean, an important dialogue to have, and I appreciate, in these committee of council meetings, the idea was we could have more informal conversations at times when that's needed, and I think we've done that tonight on both of these issues. So I do appreciate all members of council bringing their thoughts and perspectives this evening. I'll ask maybe one last time if anyone has anything to add on this item, and if not, I'll move on to the next. So thank you for that, and I will move on. The next item on the agenda